Here today. Let's go to the book of 2 Samuel chapter number 11. 2 Samuel chapter number 11. Last week we began looking at a very sobering story in the scriptures about David and his adulterous affair with Bathsheba. Now we saw last time that the Bible declared David as a man after God's own heart. He was a man that was completely dedicated, if you will, in fulfilling the will of God in every area of his life. However, despite that, he failed in this area, and of course it would cost him dearly. And God, as we've been seeing through this series, of course, has placed a lot of these stories in His Word for us as an example, so that we understand what happens when we obey God and what happens when we don't obey God, and how the consequences can vary in severity and length and all these types of things. We see, of course, how God views sin. We see how we can't get away with anything, and how we can be even restored when we've done things we shouldn't have. You know, when we look at this scenario again, it's sobering in the fact that if this could happen to David, the man after God's own heart, it could happen to us too. Nobody's super spiritual around here. Nobody's got it all together. Nobody's the pinnacle of God's creation here as far as their spirituality goes. We're all a bunch of flesh. We all can sin. We can all fall apart. None of us can lift ourselves up in pride. David could have easily. And maybe even he did. We're not sure. But if this stuff could happen to David, it could happen to us too. And I believe God records this story for us to teach us that lesson. But the flesh truly is weak. Should never be trusted. 2 Samuel 11, we'll pick it up at verse 6 where we left off last time. Actually, let's start at verse 5. And the woman conceived and sent and told David and said, I am with child. David sent to Joab, saying, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. And when Uriah was come unto him, David demanded of him how Joab did, and how the people did, and how the war prospered. And David said to Uriah, go down to thy house and wash thy feet. And Uriah departed out of the king's house, and there followed him a mess of meat from the king. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and went not down to his house. And when they had told David, saying, Uriah went not down unto his house, David said unto Uriah, camest not thou from thy journey? Why then didst thou not go down unto thine house? And Uriah said unto David, the ark and Israel and Judah abide in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are encamped in the open fields. Shall I then go into mine house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As thou livest and as thy soul liveth, I will not do this thing. And David said to Uriah, tarry here today also, and tomorrow I will let thee depart. So Uriah abode in Jerusalem that day and the morrow. And when David had called him, he did eat and drink before him, and he made him drunk. And even he went out to lie on his bed with the servants of his lord, but went not down to his house. And it came to pass in the morning that David wrote a letter to Joab and set it by the hand of Uriah. And he wrote in the letter, saying, set ye Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die. And it came to pass when Joab observed the city, and he assigned Uriah unto the place where he knew that valiant men were. And the men of the city went out and fought with Joab, and there fell some of the people, the servants of David, and Uriah the Hittite died also. Then Joab sent and told David all the things concerning the war, and charged the messenger, saying, when thou hast made an end of telling the matters of the war unto the king, and if so be that the king's wrath arise, and he say unto thee, wherefore approach ye that so nigh unto the city when ye did fight? Knew ye not that they would shoot from the wall? Who smote Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal? Did not a woman cast a piece of millstone upon him from the wall, that he died in Thebez? Why went ye nigh the wall? Then say thou, thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So the messenger went, and came and showed David all that Joab had sent forth. And the messenger said unto David, surely the men prevailed against us, and came out unto us into the field, and we were upon them, even unto the entering of the gate. The shooter shot from off the wall upon the servant, and some of the king's servants be dead, and thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. Then David said unto the messenger, thus shalt thou say unto Joab, let not this thing displease thee. For the sword devoureth one as well as another. Make thy battle more strong against the city, and overthrow it, and encourage thou him. When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband. And when the morning was past, David sent and fetched her to his house, and she became his wife, and bare him a son. For the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. We're going to pick up here today with this study as we talk about the story of David and Bathsheba. This is part 2. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time of study. We pray that it will be profitable as we open the Word and see a lesson taking place before our eyes. Help us to understand it better for your sake. In Jesus' name, amen. You know, as we saw last time, David had been doing quite well up to this point in his life. He had been busy about the work of God as the king of the Jewish nation. He was experiencing loads of success. Some might say he had the Midas touch because everything he was doing was turning to gold. He was being very victorious. And that, of course, was due to the hand of God upon his life, the blessing of God that was taking place that was there. The 2 Samuel 8, verse 6, it says, Then David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus, and the Syrians became servants to David and brought gifts, and the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. Verse 14 also says, And the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. God's hand was upon David and everything, as a result, everything David did, everything he touched, turned to gold. It was being very successful. He wasn't, of course, without his battles, but he was winning victories decisively. But for whatever reason, David, who was busily involved, was active, was going about his father's will, if you will. Disengaged. Step back. For no apparent reason whatsoever. That's what we see in the opening verse of chapter 11. It says, It came to pass after the year was expired, that at the time when kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the children of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David tarried still at Jerusalem. He was in a period of time when kings would be going forth to battle, that he would be involved, he would be about the things he was supposed to be doing, but for whatever reason, he chose to disengage. He pulled back from things, evidently, because it appears he just didn't feel like doing it anymore. Or at least that time. Or, I've been having so much success, I'm just going to kind of ease back and take it easy and just begin to coast a little bit. You know, they say when people work hardest to get to the top, but when they get to the top, it's actually harder to stay there than it is to get there. David was at the top. And he chose to not maintain himself, but to just begin to coast. Just begin to coast. He just disengaged. And this was not for providential reasons. In other words, God did not hinder his decision here or say, David, no, you have to stay back. It wasn't for practical reasons. In other words, there's nothing here that indicates that David needed a rest. He maybe was getting a rest between battles. It was just because he just didn't feel like doing it. And that's a very dangerous place to be, especially for a man of influence. David was a man of influence because he was the king. And he had set a track record of faithfulness up until this point. Explicit faithfulness. Faithfulness that was second to none. You know, Satan is always trying to pull down people of influence. You realize that? God, he's always trying to do that. Because when he pulls down people of influence, he pulls down those people that they influence. Say, well, I don't influence many people. Well, you'd be surprised how many people you're influencing. You know, if you're a parent today, you're influencing your kids. If you're a boss at your job, you're influencing somebody. Kids influence kids. My children influence each other. Satan wants to take down people of influence. And of course, the greater the influence, the greater the prize for him. And whenever Satan can pull down a person of influence, it will always result in others being pulled down. Mark it down. It always happens. And David had tremendous influence and power at this time. But with that, great restraints needed to be in place. that by doing this, what he did, he actually threw him off. The restraints of keeping his mind and his hands busy, instead of twiddling his thumbs and staring at his phone all night in the palace. Those restraints need to be in place. I have some books written by an author by the name of John Maxwell, and he's written a lot of books on leadership. And very interesting stuff he has. But I have one book where he talks about leadership and the steps of leadership. And he said this: the higher you go up in leadership and influence, the higher you go up, the less rights that you have. It's true. The less rights that you have. Others can do some things, but you can't. Others can get away with some things with less less impact than you. If a leader gets taken down, again, it affects a multitude of people, right? If a pastor fails, and I've known of pastors that have failed morally, that affects a whole congregation. Sometimes, especially if they're a well-known pastor, that affects well beyond their churches. If you got a parent, let's say a parent that goes off into an adulterous relationship, that affects their home and of course their friends and things like that. Why? Because those people have influence. And when you go up higher, when you take on responsibility and have more influence under your belt, so to say, you have less rights. You can't do certain things. Maybe they are okay for others to do, but you can't. I think it was President Bush during the Iraq invasion and so forth. I don't think he made a rule, from what I understand, of not going golfing on the weekends. Say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, he felt, I guess, evidently, from what I understand, that while he has sent troops into battle, the least he could do is not have to be at leisure while they're there. You have to respect the person for that. The higher you go up, the less rights you have. Others can, but you can't. And by the way, God only advances us if we have the character to handle that kind of influence. If God knows we're going to squander our influence for personal gain, He will take that influence away. But even then, when that character is there, the restraints of various kinds will still be in place. Because it's easy for anybody in a position of influence to abuse it. Even the best of people, they can abuse it because we all need a level of restraint. Otherwise, our sinful tendencies are going to take over. We'll get arrogant with that position. And it won't be long until we lose that position. And it takes a while. It takes a while to build influence too, by the way. It takes longevity, it takes consistency, it takes faithfulness, things like that, but you can lose it in a moment's notice. That's why it's so serious and so sober when you have influence, especially the greater influence you have in some area of life. If we don't take it seriously and we squander and abuse it, we will take others down with us. We will take others down with us. It could be our families, it could be people that you associate with, it could be people in a church setting like this one. And that's serious in the eyes of God. Our decisions impact others significantly, especially if we have a level of influence. And we are accountable for that. Look at James chapter number 1. Hold your place here. Book of James. Book of James chapter number 1. Or chapter number 3, excuse me. It says here this: My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation. The more influence you have, the greater responsibility and accountability to God you have, and I have. we have great responsibility. We give an account for that influence that we have. Thus, it would be wise for us to use that influence in a proper manner. I have known people who have taken their influence and used it for evil. They've hurt other people. They've tried to destroy churches. They've used it to attack other people. And it's wrong. It's wrong. And David here, in this case, he was a man of tremendous influence. And certainly he was a target for Satan. And Satan saw that David kind of got a little lax in his approach to spiritual things. David's disengagement led him to a position of vulnerability. Instead of staying busy, he got lazy. He was disengaged. He had too much spare time doing nothing of any significance that opened his life up to temptation because there was nothing there to occupy his time. You know, we complain about being busy, but sometimes maybe that's a good thing, that we're a little bit overly busy sometimes. I'm not saying we should never have rest, but too much playtime will put us in a position that could very well open up an avenue that we never thought we would take. That's what happened with David here. He's laying around at night, verse 2. It came to pass at evening time that David arose from off his bed. Just slouching, just being a bum, if you will. You know, I've seen this and I've learned this over the course of time. God never wants his people to be at ease a little too long. He never does. He will change things up. He'll mix things up. He'll throw curveballs into our situations because he doesn't like us to get too comfortable. Because the minute we get comfortable, we diss him. We can just slack off. We can coast. We don't have to keep things close to God. Every time that happens, we get ourselves in trouble. And God, and maybe if we have a curveball thrown into our lives and a little upheaval, maybe we ought to start thanking God for it, because maybe if he hadn't thrown that into our lives, we'd end up like David, doing something we never thought we'd ever do. God likes to see his people make sure that they have something to do. You know, when I mentioned this last time, that when God, after the fall, when mankind sinned, brought sin into the world, God, part of the curse was that man would have to work by the sweat of his face so that he could provide food for himself. Now, I don't think work is necessarily cursed because they were working in the garden. But what happened is that God had to make it harder for mankind to grow his food. Why? Because it gave mankind something to do so that his sin doesn't run wild. When there's too much playtime, that's when we get in trouble. We have a society that works a lot, that's good, but you know what, if we didn't, people just do whatever they want, they just kind of hang out, they start thinking the wrong things, and get involved in wrong, even good people this can happen to. See, David made a provision for his flesh, and Satan pounced all over him. And in this case, what seemed like just a little monkey business created some unintended developments. Very unintended. As we see, first off, the conspiracy. The conspiracy. Now, David's one-night secret stand just went public. In verse 5, the woman conceived and sent and told David, "I'm pregnant." Uh-oh. This was just going to be a little one-night stand. This was just going to be a little fling. Just a little fun, quote-unquote. But decisions always have consequences. Bathsheba here was pregnant. Now David had a choice to make. He can cover it up or he can come clean. But this was a big scandal. Big scandal. Considering who Bathsheba was. The wife of Uriah the Hittite. The granddaughter, if you know the story at all, the granddaughter of Ahithophel, David's number one counselor. Big scandal. So what's David going to do? Well, he does what we do too much. We plot a conspiracy on Ahithophel. And he plotted this conspiracy against Uriah. He thought that he could make it appear that the child was Uriah's. That's what we see in verses 7 through 13. He immediately sends to Joab, bring Uriah back here. Tell him to come back to Jerusalem. So Uriah, yes sir, goes back and heads to Jerusalem, stands before David, and David, it says here, demanded of him how Joab did, how the people did, how the war did. You know, he made it sound like it was an official thing, it was a big deal. I brought you here because I just want to know what's going on. That was not the reason why. But he was using these avenues that were at his disposal to plot this conspiracy to hide his sin. And then as you follow the story here, well, it's convenient. Well, you can't go back tonight. So just go back to the house and say hi to Bathsheba for me. And give her a hug and kiss. And by the way, I'm going to send you a big old T-bone steak, a porterhouse with you. You guys grill it up. And I like that. He sends a mess of meat. You see what he's doing. What man can turn down meat? There are some. I could be like, wow, that'd be great. It's like, boy, I'm getting the royal treatment here. But what's interesting here is what you see here is that David didn't count on Uriah's stellar character. Uriah had learned from David. Because up to this point, David had a good character. And David had been a great leader. Always doing what was right. And Uriah had no reason to doubt David's sincerity. But he's like, I can't go down there. I can't have it easy when all my battle buddies, if you will, are in the trenches. I'm not going to do that. And I'm sure to David, and I'm sure this happened, I'm sure that just ate David alive. Especially what he's trying to do here. I'm sure, I hope he felt like a scoundrel. And of course, it goes on and says he gets him, the next day he gets him drunk. By the way, nothing ever good has come out of a booze bottle when you see it in Scripture. Okay? Here David got him drunk. But even drunk, Uriah had better character than David at this stage. And what David does next is even lower. Because David takes advantage of the loyalty and commitment of Uriah. Verses 14 through 17, he writes a letter and he gives it to Uriah. Uriah, obedient soldier, class act, takes that letter without even opening it. Not knowing what it says, just knows that this is an official letter from the king to the general, and I'm going to do my duty with all diligence. I mean, Uriah was a great soldier. If our army had a pack of soldiers like Uriah, we would win the world over every war that there is. That's the kind of commitment that they actually try to instill in our soldiers. And Uriah, he got taken advantage of here. So, this is really low. And he brings that letter to Joab, and Joab reads it. Of course, Joab doesn't have the greatest ear. He's like, whatever, I guess send him in. He doesn't even question it. But say, well, he wondered if he was the king. Joab questioned other things of David's decision making, by the way. But Joab doesn't know that ever. He puts him in the hottest part of the battle. And I'm sure Uriah, if he was any man, said, well, it's going to take some courage, but you know what? I'm a soldier, I'm going to do my part. And he goes and he ends up losing his life. I mean, this is about as low as it gets. You think through this story. I mean, what David does here is he abuses his power. He takes advantage of people who have better character than him. I mean, David is hitting some blows that he had never even come close to hitting before. But that's what happens when we try to cover up sin. Go to Proverbs 28. Proverbs chapter 28. The man after God's nothing but despicable. Proverbs 28, verse 13. It says, he that covereth his sins shall not prosper, but whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy. The first part of the verse, though, says, he that covereth his sins shall not prosper. David's trying to cover his sin, and he's gotten pretty desperate in doing so. And in order to cover up sin, he had to commit more sin, even graver sin. That's the same thing with us. If we try to cover up sin, you know what's going to happen? We're just going to commit more sin and bigger sins, if you will. I'm not trying to classify sin, but I mean, then it went from adultery to murder. And not just murder of an enemy, but a murder of a loyal subject who had sacrificed for the kingdom of Israel. And this is terrible. But that's what happens when we try to start covering up sin. We'll find ourselves going to depths we never thought possible. We never thought we'd ever do. And we'll do some of the dirtiest things. Why? Because we are so desperate in trying to cover up the thing that we don't want anybody to know. Well, the depths of lying, the depths of cheating, the depths of stealing. And David did alone. He used the power of the king to get rid of one of his most loyal, mighty men for the sake of his own fall. It's very easy to lose a lot of respect for David here, because again, it's completely unbecoming of who he has been. But again, it shows us the depths we'll go to if we get desperate in trying to cover up something from being exposed that needs to be forsaken. And again, I want to remind us that if this can happen to David, it can happen to any one of us. And for all practical purposes, it appeared that David, at least initially, got away with it. He got the report, Uriah's dead. And Joab was concerned he was going to get some pushback from David. But David says, oh, it's okay. You win some, you lose some. Just restrike and try again. Encourage Joab. Or he's kind of, at least initially, probably thinking, well, I got myself out of that one. And I get old Bathsheba. We'll just kind of move on. It's not a big deal. End of verse 27 says, the thing that displeased the Lord. God had saw every ounce of it. Which led to number 2, confrontation. When we sow bad seeds, we don't always see the fruit right away. Kind of like farming or planting. If you planted a garden before or a farm, you know, you throw in seeds, you don't wake up the next day and there's the bumper crop. No. The seed goes into the ground and can be easily forgotten. But then it begins to sprout. And as time plays out, eventually the fruit blossoms. Galatians 6:7, God is not mocked. For whatsoever man soweth, that shall he also reap. It's not a matter of if we're going to reap, it's a matter of when. It's a spiritual law. It always happens. Now David went through roughly 8-9 months thinking he got away with it. Because it says here in verse 27 that they got married, she had a son, everything seems good. So he went through a normal pregnancy length thinking he got away with it. But then the prophet showed up. Just thinking preacher, right? Look at chapter 12, verse 1. And the Lord sent Nathan unto David, and came unto him, and said unto him, there were 2 men in one city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had exceeding many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing save one little ewe lamb, which he had brought and nourished up, and it grew together with him, and with his children. It did eat of his own meat, and drank of his own cup, and lay it in his bosom, and was not unto him as a daughter. And there came a traveler unto the rich man, and he spared to take of his own flock and of his own herd, to dress for the wayfaring man that was come unto him, but took the poor man's lamb, and dressed it for him that was come, dressed for the man that was come to him. David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, and he said to Nathan, "As the Lord liveth, the man that hath done this thing shall surely die, and he shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing, and because he had no pity." And Nathan said to David, "Thou art the man." Ooh. Preachers are really good at that, right? At some point in life, we will be confronted with the consequences of our choices if we have done it. May never effort. Payday is someday. And through the prophet, God rebukes David harshly. But yet, he is still very merciful. Because we saw what David did. I mean, it's just completely despicable. And God rebukes David. He gets an earful, and David, in fact, he deserved more. Verse 7. "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I anointed thee king over Israel, and I delighted thee out of the hand of Saul, and I give thee thy master's house, and thy master's wives into thy bosom, and give thee the house of Israel, and of Judah, and if that had been too little, I would have moreover have given unto thee such and such things. Wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord, and to do evil in his sight? Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon." I mean, God, this is actually merciful for God in this case. You think about that description of the man with the one ewe lamb for a moment. Was that truly how Uriah treated Bathsheba? If it was, he was a stellar man. He was a stellar husband. I don't doubt he probably was. But based on the way you see that he responds to David's command. I'm sure he was a great husband. By the way, David committed to one wife. God is, again, very merciful to David because David deserved to die. Right? Adultery and, of course, murder in those days was grounds for execution. Instead, and possibly maybe this was worse, but we see that there was judgment that was laid against him. That would have been very difficult. That will be very difficult for David as he progresses in life. Verse 10, "Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine house. I will take thy wives before thine house, and give them unto thy neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of his son. For thou didst it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel, and before the sun." Needless to say, David's got a bumpy road ahead. And he has a choice to make, as we see number 3, the contrition. David had this big choice now he had to make. Would he humble himself and admit his guilt, or continue to cover things up and make things worse than what they already were? And he makes the right choice, fortunately, here. Verse 13, "And David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said unto David, The Lord also hath put away thy sin. Thou shalt not die." Remember, David and God have a very close relationship. You think about the closest relationship you have in life. David had a closer one with God than you and that person. I don't doubt that. Of course, that relationship was centered because of the events that transpired here in this passage. And I believe, despite maybe trying to put on a good face, I believe David was dying inside. Psalm 51 is a psalm that David wrote when after he was confronted by Nathan about Bathsheba in the situation. And he asked God, "Revive that joy of my salvation. Bring that back. I have sinned against you. I have transgressed against you. I am guilty." David develops a very contrite heart. I believe that psalm reflects David's heart as it was broken. It was willing to come clean, and God forgave him. Oh, no. Yes, there would be consequences, but David knew everything was right between him and God. And that really meant the world to him, I believe. You know, have you ever been out on the outs with somebody? Maybe it's a spouse or a friend or a child. You know, a relationship you know is supposed to be a special one and it's not. It just stinks, doesn't it? It's just terrible. You just feel, oh. You try to get through the day and you're just thinking about it and you're stewing about it. It's like, this is not fun. That's exactly what David felt. But when he got things right, his heart would be at peace. It's a lot like when we get saved. Before we're saved, we have to recognize that things are not right between us and God. Every person has to come to the realization that they are not right with God initially. None of us are born into this world right with God. That our sin has put a wall between us and Him. And like David, we've got to come clean and admit that we are a sinner deserving of the just punishment of sin. Romans 3:10 says there's none righteous, no, not one. Romans 3:23, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Romans 6:23, for the wages of sin is death. All these things communicate to us that we need to have a time in which we get right with God. The day somebody gets saved, they have been confronted about their sin by God, and in an act of humble contrition, admit their guilt and shame and deserving of judgment. But they have a heart willing to turn from that sin and trust Jesus Christ to pay for their sins against God. If we've been saved, maybe we've fallen away from God, if you will. The sin, like David, maybe it's not adultery, but it's something else. We'll not be at peace in life until we come clean with the sins that we've committed. Tonight I'll be talking about finding inner peace. How many Christians do not have any peace at all in here? Because the major reason is what I'm talking about right now. They have not gotten things right in their own heart about the sins that they've committed. And those sins might even just simply be an attitude we have about something or someone. Because there's never going to be peace until there's contrition. And David finally, though, found peace after months of misery. Months of misery. And it didn't have to be that way, but it took a confrontation to finally break him. God had to confront him and say, "Thou art the man, David." And David finally was humble enough. I think he was miserable enough. God waited a while to get him to the point, I think, of being where he would break. And when he broke, thankfully he didn't shoot the messenger. Because you follow some of the other kings that would come to pass, they did shoot the messenger. Some of them cost them their lives. But David was humble enough because he wanted to be right with God. Because God meant that much to him. And if we're saved, God ought to be that much to do, not to shoot the messenger, but respond to the Maker. Respond to our Maker. David got things right. He got things right. You know, today, if you're unsaved, what holds you back from being saved? You'll never be at peace in your heart without that time of salvation. If you are saved, and you find yourself justifying or covering some sin, it's only going to get worse. And you'll continually do like David did. Continually having to commit more sin to cover up the sin of the past. Instead of stonewalling and stopping it, instead of admitting wrong and confessing it before God for what it is. Well, fourthly and finally, we'll talk about the consequences. Decisions have consequences, right? Decisions have consequences. Good decisions have good consequences. Bad decisions have bad consequences. Pretty simple. Now, David got right, but remember the seeds were still planted. they would sprout. And primarily because David was the influencer he was, and God had to show the world, if you will, that not even David could get away with anything. Look at verse 14. Howbeit, because by this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also that is born unto thee shall surely die. And Nathan departed unto his house, and the Lord struck the child, that Uriah's wife bare unto David, and was very sick. Notice the Word of God still even calls Bathsheba Uriah's wife. That's the way God recognized it. Now David would go on, and if you follow the story, he would pray for a crop failure. And sometimes crop failures happen. They certainly should be pursued, and that's what David pursued, because he said, who knows, maybe God will show some mercy here. But in this case, God did not. And David would go on to have some very negative things happen. He never, when he was sitting on that rooftop, he never saw this. He just saw the pleasure that he was going to enjoy. A brief moment that cost him more than he ever thought. Things would go on, and he'd have a daughter raped by the name of Tamar, by one of his sons, by the name, I believe it's his eldest son, Amnon. A few years would pass, and Amnon would be killed by his son, his brother Absalom, the brother of Tamar. Absalom would flee the kingdom for a few years. David's heart would long after Absalom. Eventually Absalom was brought back, but ignored. Enraging the bitterness of Absalom to the point where he conspired a rebellion against David. In fact, David had to run out of town to flee from Absalom. Absalom would take the concubines of David and have a little show, if you will, in front of the whole place, fulfilling the judgment mentioned in verse 11. Absalom in battle would die. And of course, if you notice at the end of that story, David is weeping and hollering and wailing over the situation with Absalom. And then just about the time when he came to pass on the kingship, he had another son by the name of Adonijah, tried to steal the kingship from the appointed king Solomon. And Solomon had to come to the point where Adonijah had to be put to death. He would lose 4 sons. He didn't see that at the beginning. He didn't see it there when he was flipping the channels on the bed, right? He wasn't seeing any of that. But decisions have consequences. Seeds will sprout. Now, to David's credit, did David say, "Oh, woe is me. I have every excuse not to serve God anymore. I have every excuse to forget about God. I have every excuse to go back to the world and all this stuff." Go to 1 Kings chapter 15. 1 Kings chapter number 15. This is the way God explains David. 1 Kings 15, verse 5. Because David did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, and turned not aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, save only in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. You know what that tells me is this. David was extremely faithful before the situation. He had the fall, but he went back to his faithfulness to God. And God to this day still said, he's a man after my own heart. He's got a special place one day over the nation of Israel. He is still considered a great man, despite this. But from this time going forward, though, David would walk with a limp, so to say, through life. He would have that dash, he would have that star. And God still brought some good out of it. I'm thankful that even in the worst of circumstances, God can bring good, because God is gracious. But if we're not careful, the consequences of our past sins will still haunt us. And maybe today you have some of that. Can I encourage you to be like David? Just stay faithful. And may I encourage us, if we have not made some of those mistakes, don't put ourselves in a position to let that happen. Stay in the will of God. Stay faithful in serving Him. Stay right with Him. And by every means, if there is a wrong that needs to be reconciled, get it reconciled before it destroys your life and those that you influence. Sad story, yeah. Lots of lessons. Maybe take the lessons seriously, because that's what God intended. Amen. Let's stand to our feet.